The town of Elmswood was a quiet place, tucked away between rolling hills and dense forests. It was the kind of place where secrets lingered like fog, and the air always seemed to carry an unspoken warning. The people who lived there avoided a particular stretch of woods where an overgrown, forgotten track lay hidden beneath years of moss and decay. They called it the Phantom Line, though no one could remember why. Stories whispered in hushed tones spoke of a train that once ran its course there, a train that shouldn't exist. For Olivia Carter, Elmswood was her refuge. After a messy breakup and the loss of her job, she sought solace in the town's eerie stillness. Her uncle, a retired railway worker, had left her a small cabin near the edge of the woods. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and quiet was exactly what she needed. The cabin was a modest structure, its wooden exterior weathered by years of neglect. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine and old books. A single bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living room filled with her uncle's collections of railway memorabilia made up the entire space. Among the items were old maps, rusted lanterns, and faded photographs of trains that seemed to belong to another era. One photograph in particular caught her eye, a black and white image of a train with a sleek, almost sinister design. Scrawled on the back in her uncle's handwriting were the words, "The Midnight Express." Olivia didn't think much of it at first. Her uncle had always been a bit eccentric, spinning wild tales about ghost trains and haunted tracks. But the longer she stayed in the cabin, the more she felt like she wasn't alone. At night, the wind would howl through the trees, carrying with it a faint metallic sound, like the distant echo of a train whistle. One evening, curiosity got the better of her. Armed with a flashlight and a journal, she ventured into the woods, following the path her uncle had once warned her never to take. The air grew colder as she pushed through the dense undergrowth, her boots crunching against fallen leaves and twigs. After what felt like an eternity, she stumbled upon the track. The rails were rusted, and the wooden ties were rotting, but the sight of them sent a shiver down her spine. Olivia knelt down, running her fingers over the cold, damp steel. That's when she noticed something strange. Footprints. They weren't hers and they weren't fresh, but they led along the track as if someone had walked there recently. She followed them, her breath visible in the chilly air. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the woods transformed into a labyrinth of shadows. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing the track ahead. Just as Olivia was about to turn back, she heard it. A low, mournful whistle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. The sound froze her in place, her heart pounding in her chest. Then she saw it. In the distance, through the trees, a faint light flickered. It moved steadily, growing brighter with each passing second. The ground began to tremble beneath her feet, and the air filled with the rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails. Before she could fully comprehend what was happening, the train emerged from the darkness. It was unlike any train she'd ever seen. Its sleek, black body shimmered as if it were made of shadows, and its windows glowed with an eerie, pale light. The train slowed as it approached, coming to a stop right in front of her. Steam hissed from its brakes, enveloping her in a chilling fog. The door to one of the carriages slid open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. A voice, soft and inviting, echoed from within. "Step aboard, Olivia." Her blood ran cold. How did it know her name? She took a step back, but the ground beneath her seemed to pull her forward. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The voice spoke again, this time with an edge of urgency. "Don't be afraid. This is your chance to escape." Escape from what? The question lingered in her mind, but she couldn't bring herself to ask. Instead, she reached for her flashlight, aiming it at the open door. The beam of light revealed nothing. No seats, no walls, just an infinite void that seemed to swallow the light whole. The train's whistle blew again, louder this time, and the pressure to step aboard became almost unbearable. Just as Olivia was about to cross the threshold, she heard another sound, distant but clear. It was the crunch of leaves, followed by hurried footsteps. Someone was coming. Turning her head, she saw a figure emerge from the woods. A man, disheveled and wide-eyed, waving his arms frantically. "Don't get on," he shouted. "Whatever you do, don't get on that train." Before she could react, the train's whistle screamed, and the man's words were drowned out by the deafening noise. The train's lights flickered, and the door began to close. Olivia stood frozen between the voice that called her and the man who warned her. The air grew heavy, and time seemed to slow. And then, everything went dark. Darkness enveloped Olivia. For a moment, it felt as though she were suspended in nothingness. Her senses dulled and her thoughts trapped in a swirling vortex of fear. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the world came rushing back. She was standing on the overgrown track, gasping for breath, her flashlight still clutched tightly in her hand. The train was gone. The woods were silent, save for the sound of her ragged breathing and the faint rustle of leaves. Olivia's legs threatened to give out beneath her as she turned toward the man who had shouted at her moments earlier. He stood a few feet away, his face illuminated by the pale moonlight. He was tall and gaunt, his clothes disheveled as though he had been running for days. His eyes, wide and frantic, locked onto hers. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse but urgent. Olivia struggled to find her voice. "What just happened? That train, it was real. I saw it. It's real," the man said, stepping closer, his gaze darting nervously around the woods. "But it's not what it seems. That wasn't a train, it's a trap. Predator. If you'd stepped on board," he trailed off, shaking his head as though the thought was too terrible to voice. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. "How do you know all this? Who are you?" The man hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the darkness. "My name's Ethan. I've been tracking this thing for years, trying to warn people before it's too late." "Tracking it?" Olivia repeated, her mind racing to keep up. "You mean it's happened before? People have boarded that train?" Ethan's expression darkened. "They don't come back. Not as themselves, anyway." A chill ran down Olivia's spine. "What does that mean?" Ethan gestured for her to follow him. "Not here. It's not safe. Come on. I'll explain everything." Ethan led Olivia through the woods, navigating the twisted undergrowth with practiced ease. Despite her lingering fear, Olivia couldn't help but feel a flicker of curiosity. Who was this man, and how had he come to know so much about the Phantom Line? After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at a small clearing. A makeshift camp was set up beneath the shelter of a large tree. An old tarp stretched across branches, a smoldering fire pit, and a battered backpack leaning against the trunk. "Not much, but it's home for now," Ethan muttered, motioning for Olivia to sit on an overturned log. As she settled, Ethan crouched by the fire pit, stirring the embers to life. The flickering light cast long shadows across his face, making him look even more haunted than he already did. "Start talking," Olivia said, crossing her arms. "What's going on with that train?" Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's not just a train. Something else. Something old and powerful. It preys on people, luring them in with promises of escape, second chances, whatever they want most. But once you're on board, there's no getting off." Olivia's stomach twisted. "And the people who board it? They're taken," Ethan said grimly, Their bodies are never found, but their spirits, sometimes they come back. Not to help, though, to warn. Or worse, warn about what? Ethan stared into the flames. That it's never finished. It always comes back for more. As the fire crackled, Olivia leaned forward, her curiosity mingling with dread. How do you know all this? How are you even still alive if you've been tracking it? Ethan's jaw tightened. For a moment, he seemed unwilling to answer, but then he sighed heavily. Because I was supposed to be one of them. Olivia frowned. What do you mean? It was 10 years ago, Ethan began, his voice hollow. I was just a kid back then. My family lived in a small town a lot like this one. We were struggling. Money was tight, my parents were arguing all the time. One night I heard it. The whistle. I was walking home, and there it was, sitting on an old track that hadn't been used in decades. The train looked inviting, like it could take me anywhere but there. He paused, his gaze distant. I almost stepped on. I wanted to, but at the last second, I heard a voice, a warning just like I gave you. Someone grabbed me, pulled me back. It was an old man, a drifter. He knew about the train, said it had been haunting the tracks for as long as he could remember. He called it a curse. What happened to him? Olivia asked softly. Ethan's expression hardened. He didn't make it. The train. It didn't like being interrupted. The weight of his words settled over them like a heavy fog. Olivia shivered despite the warmth of the fire. So why are you still following it? Why not leave it behind? Because it doesn't leave me behind, Ethan said darkly. It keeps coming back, and I can't stand by and watch it take more people. Their conversation was cut short by a sound that made Olivia's blood run cold. The distant whistle of the train. Ethan shot to his feet, his eyes wide. No, it's too soon. It's not supposed to come back this quickly. Olivia scrambled to her feet. What do we do? Ethan grabbed her arm, his grip firm. We run. Now. The whistle grew louder, accompanied by the faint clatter of wheels on steel. The air grew thick, pressing down on them like a weight. Olivia could feel it in her chest. A dark, oppressive force that seemed to sap her strength. They plunged into the woods, Ethan leading the way. The trees closed in around them, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. The sound of the train grew louder, relentless, as though it were chasing them. Olivia glanced over her shoulder and froze. Through the trees, she saw the train. It wasn't running on the track anymore. It was moving through the woods, gliding over the ground as though it were alive. The pale light from its windows illuminated the forest, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. Keep moving, Ethan shouted, pulling her forward. But it was too late. The train was gaining on them, its whistle echoing through the night like a mournful cry. And then, just as the light engulfed them, the world went black. When Olivia opened her eyes, she wasn't in the woods anymore. The dense forest had vanished, replaced by a dim, metallic corridor lined with rusted rivets and faded wallpaper. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through her chest. She was on the train. Ethan, she called out, her voice echoing unnervingly down the corridor. No response. Panic surged as she stumbled forward, her boots clanging against the cold metal floor. She passed compartment after compartment, each one sealed shut, their frosted glass windows obscuring whatever lay inside. The hum grew louder, resonating with a strange rhythm that tugged at her mind. She pressed her hands against her temples, trying to drown it out. Focus, Olivia, she whispered to herself. Think. What did Ethan say? The train preys on what you desire most. Her hands dropped to her sides. What did she desire most? As if in answer, the door of a nearby compartment creaked open. Warm light spilled out, pooling onto the floor. Olivia hesitated, her instincts screaming to turn and run, but her feet carried her forward. The room was eerily familiar. A small, cozy living room with mismatched furniture and the faint smell of lavender in the air. Her mother sat on the worn couch, humming a tune as she folded laundry. "Mom," Olivia whispered, her throat tightening. Her mother looked up, smiling warmly. "Liv, you're home. Dinner's almost ready." Olivia's chest ached. Her mother had passed away years ago, yet here she was, alive and well, as though time had rewound itself. "You're not real," Olivia said, her voice trembling. Her mother's smile faltered. "What are you talking about, sweetheart? Of course I'm real. Come, sit with me." A part of Olivia wanted to believe her, to sink into the comforting illusion. But Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "It preys on what you desire most." "No," she said firmly, backing away. "You're not real." The room flickered like a dying bulb. Her mother's face twisted, the warm expression replaced by something cold and unfeeling. The walls darkened, the furniture dissolving into shadows. "You shouldn't have boarded," the figure hissed, its voice guttural. Olivia bolted for the door, her heart pounding as the room collapsed behind her. The corridor was alive now, pulsating like a giant artery. Shadows flitted across the walls, whispering in a language Olivia couldn't understand. She turned a corner and collided with someone. "Ethan!" she gasped, relief washing over her. But it wasn't Ethan. The man before her was older, his face gaunt and hollow, his clothes tattered. He looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. "I know," Olivia said, gripping his arm. "How do we get off?" The man shook his head. "There's no getting off. Not unless it lets you." "What do you mean? Who are you?" "I've been here for years," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "We all have. It won't let us leave." Olivia's stomach churned. "What is it?" The man's eyes darted around the corridor. "It's coming. You need to hide." Before she could respond, a low, bone-chilling wail echoed through the train. The man's face contorted with fear as he pushed her toward a nearby compartment. "Hide! Now!" Olivia slipped into the compartment, closing the door just as the corridor erupted with noise. Heavy footsteps thudded against the floor, accompanied by the sound of metal scraping against metal. Through the frosted glass, she saw it. The figure was tall and skeletal, its body draped in tattered black robes that seemed to ripple with their own shadowy life. A conductor's hat perched atop its head, tilted at an unsettling angle. In its bony hand, it held a staff that glowed with a sickly green light. The shadows along the walls recoiled as it passed, whispering frantically. Olivia pressed her back against the wall, holding her breath as the figure paused outside her compartment. It raised its staff, the light seeping through the glass, bathing the room in an eerie glow. For a moment, Olivia thought she'd been discovered. Then, just as suddenly, it moved on. She exhaled shakily, her heart hammering in her chest. After what felt like an eternity, the corridor fell silent again. Olivia emerged cautiously, her eyes scanning for any sign of the conductor. "Olivia!" She spun around to see Ethan sprinting toward her, his face pale but determined. "You're alive," he said, gripping her shoulders. "Thank God." Barely, Olivia muttered. "What the hell was that thing?" "The conductor," Ethan said grimly. "It keeps the train running. It's the one that decides who gets to stay. And who gets taken. And the others? The man I saw, he said he'd been here for years." Ethan nodded. "There are others, all trapped like us. The train keeps them as passengers, feeding on their despair and fear. If we don't find a way off soon, we'll end up like them. Do you have a plan?" Sort of, Ethan admitted, But it's risky. We need to find the engine room. That's where the train's power comes from. If we can destroy it, we can stop this thing. Olivia finished, a flicker of hope igniting within her. Ethan nodded. But we have to move fast. The longer we stay, the harder it is to resist the train's pull. They moved through the train cautiously, avoiding the conductor's patrols and the strange, whispering shadows. Every compartment they passed seemed to tell a different story. Glimpses of lives lost, memories distorted, and desires twisted into nightmares. Finally, they reached a heavy, rusted door at the end of the corridor. This should lead to the engine room, Ethan said, gripping the handle. Olivia tensed as he pushed the door open. Instead of machinery, they found themselves staring into a vast, starless void. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, pulling them toward the edge. "What is this?" Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum. Ethan's face hardened. The heart of the train. Before they could step back, a voice echoed from the darkness. Low, menacing, and filled with an ancient rage. "You dare challenge me?" The door slammed shut behind them. The oppressive darkness pressed against Olivia and Ethan like a living thing. The void beyond the door swirled with strange, shifting shadows that seemed to stretch toward them. The air was heavy, each breath laden with an almost tangible sense of malice. "Ethan," Olivia whispered, gripping his arm. "What is this place?" Ethan swallowed hard. The heart of the train. Alive. A low, guttural growl echoed from the void, shaking the floor beneath their feet. The door slammed shut behind them, trapping them in the vast, empty space. "I don't think it's happy we're here," Ethan muttered, his voice trembling. "No kidding," Olivia shot back, scanning the endless blackness for any sign of an escape. The growl morphed into words, deep and resonant, echoing from all directions. "You dare challenge my domain?" the voice rumbled. "Who are you?" Olivia demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am the conductor," the voice replied, "but also so much more. I am the train's master, its creator, and its will. You should not be here." Ethan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "We're leaving. You can't keep us here." A sinister laugh filled the void. "Leaving? There is no leaving. You belong to me now, just as all who came before you. This train is your home, your prison, and your end." The shadows shifted, revealing faint shapes within the void, figures trapped in the darkness, their faces frozen in expressions of despair. Olivia's stomach churned as she recognized the man she had met earlier. His gaunt frame was barely distinguishable, his eyes dull and lifeless. "We have to stop this," Olivia whispered. "We can't end up like them." Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, silver pendant, a relic he had picked up in the woods before boarding the train. It glowed faintly, its light pushing back the shadows around them. "What is that?" Olivia asked. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but it's important. Feels like hope." The conductor's voice growled again, this time laced with fury. "That does not belong here." The pendant's light grew brighter, illuminating a path through the void. Ethan grabbed Olivia's hand. "Come on. This is our way out." The light guided them through the darkness, the void gradually giving way to another metal corridor. This one was different, sleek, with walls that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. At the end of the corridor, they found the engine room. Massive gears turned sluggishly, powered by a glowing, pulsating core that seemed to breathe. The air crackled with energy, the hum louder here than anywhere else. "This is it," Ethan said. "This is what powers the train." Olivia stared at the core, a swirling mass of green and black energy. It radiated both beauty and terror. "How do we destroy it?" Ethan held up the pendant. "I think this can do it." But he hesitated. "But what?" Olivia pressed. "I think it needs a sacrifice," Ethan said quietly. Before they could act, the conductor materialized before them. Its skeletal frame towered over them, its glowing staff pulsing with the same energy as the core. "You dare defy me?" it hissed. "You think you can destroy what I have built?" "This train isn't yours anymore," Olivia said, her voice firm. "It's a prison. It is a sanctuary," the conductor replied, its voice dripping with malice. "A refuge for those who have lost their way. I give them purpose. I give them eternity." "At what cost?" Ethan demanded. "You trap them here, feed on their fears, their pain. That's not sanctuary. It's torment." The conductor raised its staff, the energy crackling menacingly. "You do not understand, but I am merciful. Surrender the pendant, and I will spare you both." Olivia stepped in front of Ethan. "We're not bargaining with you," the conductor roared, its staff slamming against the floor. The room shook violently, the gears grinding to a halt. Shadows poured from the walls, writhing toward Olivia and Ethan. "Go!" Olivia shouted, pushing Ethan toward the core. "Use the pendant." Ethan hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. "I can't leave you." "You won't," Olivia said, her voice soft but resolute. "Just do it. I'll hold it off." The conductor lunged, its skeletal hand reaching for Olivia. She dodged, grabbing a metal pipe from the floor and swinging it with all her strength. The pipe connected with a resounding crack, but the conductor barely flinched. Meanwhile, Ethan approached the core, the pendant glowing brighter with each step. The shadows clawed at him, but the light pushed them back. "Now, Ethan!" Olivia screamed. Ethan reached the core and pressed the pendant against it. The light exploded outward, engulfing the room. The conductor let out an ear-splitting shriek, its form dissolving into the blinding radiance. The train shook violently, the walls cracking and splintering. Olivia ran to Ethan, grabbing his hand as the core imploded. "Hold on," she shouted. The light consumed everything, and then, when Olivia opened her eyes, she was lying on the forest floor. The sun was rising, its golden light filtering through the trees. She sat up, her head spinning, and saw Ethan beside her, unconscious but breathing. They were back. Or were they? A faint whistle echoed in the distance, growing louder. Olivia turned, her heart sinking as she saw the train. Dilapidated and covered in vines, yet unmistakably the same, sitting on the tracks behind them. The doors creaked open. The whistle grew louder, piercing the stillness of the forest like a blade. Olivia froze, her pulse racing as she turned toward the sound. The train loomed in the distance, its rusted exterior glinting faintly in the morning light. It looked as though it had been abandoned for decades, yet the eerie glow emanating from the windows suggested otherwise. Ethan stirred beside her, groaning softly as he sat up. "What happened?" he muttered, rubbing his temples. "We're back," Olivia said, her voice hollow. "But so is the train." Ethan's gaze followed hers, his face paling as he saw the imposing silhouette on the tracks. "No, that's not possible. We destroyed it." The distant sound of a door creaking open cut him off. A low hum began to emanate from the train, a sound that resonated deep in their chests, filling them with an unshakable dread. "We need to go," Olivia said, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him to his feet. "But what if?" "No what ifs, Ethan. We can't stay here." The two stumbled through the forest, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they tried to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the spectral train. Branches snagged at their clothes, the undergrowth scratching their legs, but they didn't stop. Behind them, The hum grew louder, accompanied by the faint sound of footsteps. Olivia glanced over her shoulder, her heart sinking as she saw shadowy figures emerging from the train. Their forms were indistinct, but their glowing eyes burned with malevolence. "They're following us," she gasped. Ethan's grip on her hand tightened. "Keep running." The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees closing in around them as if the very land was conspiring against their escape. The air grew colder with each step, their breaths forming visible puffs in the dim light. Just when Olivia thought her legs would give out, they burst into a small clearing. In the center stood an old cabin, its windows boarded up and its roof sagging under the weight of years. "Do we have a choice?" Ethan asked, his eyes darting to the encroaching shadows. Olivia shook her head. "No." They raced to the cabin, the wooden door creaking ominously as they pushed it open. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of decay and damp wood. The room was sparsely furnished, a rickety table, a few broken chairs, and a fireplace filled with cold ashes. Ethan slammed the door shut and wedged a chair under the handle. "That should buy us some time. Do you think they can get in?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but I don't think this place is any safer." As they caught their breath, Olivia's eyes were drawn to a faded map pinned to the wall. The paper was brittle and yellowed with age, but the markings were clear. A network of tracks crisscrossing the forest, with a bold red circle at its center. "This," she began, tracing a finger over the map. "This is where we are. And that," she pointed to the red circle. "That's where the train is coming from." Ethan frowned. "What does it mean?" "I don't know," Olivia admitted, "but I think it's connected to the train's origin. Maybe if we get there, we can figure out how to stop it for good." Before Ethan could respond, a loud bang echoed through the cabin. The door rattled violently, the chair splintering under the force of the blows. "They're here," Olivia whispered. The door burst open, and the shadowy figures spilled into the room. Their forms flickered like smoke, but their intent was unmistakable. One lunged toward Olivia, its claw-like hands outstretched. Ethan grabbed a piece of broken chair and swung it with all his strength. The wood passed through the figure harmlessly, the specter turning its glowing eyes on him. "Run!" Ethan shouted, shoving Olivia toward the back of the cabin. "But go!" Reluctantly, Olivia sprinted toward a narrow staircase leading to the attic. Ethan followed, slamming the trapdoor shut behind them. They were plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the shadows below. "Now what?" Olivia asked, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Ethan held up the pendant, its light flickering weakly. "This worked before. Maybe it can buy us some time." As the shadows clawed at the trapdoor, Olivia noticed something in the corner of the attic. A chest, covered in dust and cobwebs. She pried it open, revealing a collection of old journals and photographs. "Look at this," she said, holding up a black and white photo. It showed a group of men and women standing in front of a train, their expression somber. At the center was a figure she recognized immediately, the conductor. "These are the people who built the train," Olivia said, flipping through the pages of a journal. "It wasn't just a train. It was an experiment. They wanted to create a vessel that could cross dimensions, but something went wrong. The train became cursed." Ethan's face hardened. "So the train isn't just haunted. It's a doorway, and the conductor is its gatekeeper," Olivia added. The pendant's light flared suddenly, and the shadows below shrieked in unison. "We need to find the source of the curse," Ethan said. "If we can destroy it, maybe we can stop this for good." The trapdoor cracked under the relentless assault of the shadows. Olivia and Ethan shared a grim look, the weight of their predicament pressing down on them. "There's no way out of this attic," Olivia said. Ethan held up the map. "Then we make one. The red circle. It's the train's origin. That's where we need to go." "How do we get there?" Ethan looked at the pendant, its light pulsing steadily now. "I think this will show us the way." The shadows surged again, and the trapdoor gave way. "Hold on," Ethan said, gripping Olivia's hand as the pendant flared brighter than ever. The room dissolved into light, and then Ethan and Olivia landed with a jarring thud, their bodies hitting uneven ground. The air was dense and suffocating, filled with the faint metallic tang of rust. A low hum vibrated through the ground, the same sound they had heard from the phantom train. Olivia groaned, sitting up to survey their surroundings. They were in a desolate clearing surrounded by towering trees that seemed to lean inward, their branches twisted unnaturally. At the center of the clearing stood a massive, decaying train station. Its roof sagged under the weight of neglect, and faded letters above the entrance read "Crossing Station." "This must be it," Ethan muttered, brushing dirt off his jacket. Olivia nodded, clutching the pendant in her hand. It glowed faintly, pulsing as if urging them forward. "The red circle on the map. This is the origin. Whatever's causing the curse is inside." As they approached the station, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to intensify. Shadows danced along the walls, though no light source was visible. The air was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional creak of rusted metal. Inside, the station was a labyrinth of shattered glass, peeling paint, and abandoned luggage. Time seemed frozen here. Old newspapers lay scattered on benches, their headlines dating back decades. Ethan picked one up. The bold letters screamed, "Tragedy at Crossings. Train derailment claims 52 live." He read aloud, his voice echoing in the empty hall. The train was carrying passengers to a nearby mining town when it derailed due to unexplained mechanical failure. Witnesses reported seeing strange lights before the accident. "Unexplained lights," Olivia murmured. "It's all connected. This is where it started." Ethan folded the newspaper and stuffed it into his pocket. "We need to find the source of the curse before those things catch up to us." The pendant's glow guided them deeper into the station, leading them to a room marked "Staff Only." Inside, they found a desk covered in papers and an old leather-bound book. Olivia flipped it open, revealing neatly written entries. It was a manifest detailing the passengers on the ill-fated train. But as she turned the pages, the names became erratic, scrawled in uneven handwriting. One entry caught her attention. "Final passenger, the conductor. Destination, beyond." "Beyond?" Ethan questioned, peering over her shoulder. "What does that mean?" Olivia turned to the last page, where a crude drawing of the train was sketched. Beneath it were the words, "To end the curse, one must confront the conductor and destroy his tether to this world." "What's his tether?" Ethan asked. As if in answer, the pendant flared, and a compartment in the desk popped open. Inside lay a rusted train whistle, its surface engraved with strange symbols. "This must be it," Olivia said, picking it up carefully. The moment she touched it, the room trembled, and the hum intensified. A deafening roar echoed through the station as shadowy figures began to pour in from the main hall. The air grew colder, their glowing eyes locking onto Olivia and Ethan. "They're here," Ethan said, his voice tight. "Run!" Olivia shouted, clutching the whistle and pendant as they bolted out of the room. The station turned into a maze, the corridors twisting and shifting as if alive. The shadows moved faster, their claw-like hands swiping at the duo. "This way!" Ethan yelled, spotting a staircase leading down to the platform. They sprinted down, their footsteps echoing on the cracked tiles. The train sat on the tracks, its door wide open, beckoning them inside. "Do we have a choice?" Olivia asked, glancing at the encroaching shadows. "No," Ethan said, grabbing her hand and pulling her aboard. The train doors slammed shut behind them, silencing the pursuing shadows. Inside, the train was pristine, a stark contrast to its decaying exterior. The seats were upholstered in rich red fabric, and golden chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, inviting glow. But the illusion was shattered as a cold voice echoed through the car. "Welcome aboard," it said. Olivia and Ethan turned to see the conductor standing at the far end of the car. His uniform was immaculate, but his face was pale and hollow, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You've come far," he continued, his voice dripping with malice. "But your journey ends here." Ethan stepped forward, holding the pendant out like a shield. "We know what you are. We know about the curse. It's time to end this." The conductor laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "End this? You cannot end what is eternal. This train is my domain, and you are nothing but trespassers." Olivia gripped the whistle tightly, feeling its weight in her hand. "This is your tether," she said. "Without it, you have no power." The conductor's smile faltered. "You don't understand what you're meddling with. That whistle binds me, yes, but it also binds the souls of the innocent. Destroy it, and they will be lost forever." Ethan hesitated, looking at Olivia. "What do we do?" The train began to move, its wheels screeching against the rusted tracks. Outside, the landscape blurred into a swirl of darkness and light. Olivia's mind raced. Could they trust the conductor's words? What if destroying the whistle only made things worse? "We can't let this continue," she said, determination hardening her voice. She raised the whistle and slammed it against the edge of a nearby seat. The metal cracked, a blinding light spilling out from within. The conductor screamed, his form flickering like a dying flame. "You fools," he roared. "You've doomed us all." The train lurched violently, throwing Olivia and Ethan to the floor. The light from the whistle consumed the train, washing everything in a brilliant glow. Olivia reached for Ethan, their hands clasping tightly as the world dissolved around them. When the light faded, they found themselves standing in a vast, empty void. The train, the conductor, and the shadows were gone. "Where are we?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Olivia held up the broken whistle, its pieces disintegrating into dust. "I don't know," she said, "but I think the real fight is just beginning." The void around Ethan and Olivia was eerily silent, an oppressive stillness that seemed to seep into their very bones. The brilliant light that had consumed the phantom train had faded, leaving them in a world where direction and dimension seemed meaningless. The ground beneath their feet was solid, but it shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting an infinite expanse of swirling shadows and faint, distant lights. "Where are we?" Ethan asked again, his voice barely breaking the silence. Olivia looked around, clutching the now disintegrated whistle's dust in her hand. "This must be what the conductor called beyond," she whispered. "The place where the curse truly resides." Ethan scanned the area, his hand instinctively reaching for Olivia's. "If this is where it started, it's also where we'll end it." As they began walking, faint whispers surrounded them. They were disjointed, fragments of voices layered over each other, their tones ranging from despair to anger. Ethan stopped abruptly when one voice stood out, a child's sob, clear and heartbreaking. "Did you hear that?" he asked, turning toward Olivia. She nodded, her face pale. "It's like echoes, memories trapped here." The whispers grew louder as they moved forward, resolving into scenes that played out around them like ghostly projections. A young woman sat on the floor of a train car, weeping into her hands. An older man stood by a window, staring into the abyss with hollow eyes. They're the passengers, Olivia realized. The ones who boarded the train and never returned. Ethan's jaw tightened. We have to find a way to free them. The whispers ceased abruptly as a shadow loomed ahead of them. It was massive, its form shifting and undulating as if made of smoke. Two glowing eyes pierced the darkness, locking onto Ethan and Olivia with a malevolent intensity. "You dare to come here?" The entity boomed, its voice shaking the ground. "You meddle in forces beyond your comprehension." Ethan stepped forward, his fear giving way to defiance. "You're the one behind the curse, aren't you? The one who's been feeding on these souls." The shadow laughed, a low, guttural sound. "I am the conductor's master, the source of his power. And now you will join my collection." Without warning, the ground beneath them shifted, and the shimmering void transformed into a labyrinth of train tracks and tunnels. The shadowy entity disappeared, leaving Ethan and Olivia alone once more. "We're trapped," Olivia said, looking around. The walls of the maze seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and every path looked identical. "Not yet," Ethan replied. "The pendant led us here, and it hasn't failed us yet." He held up the pendant, which began to glow faintly, pointing them toward one of the tunnels. "Let's move," Olivia said, her grip tightening on his arm. As they navigated the maze, they encountered horrific visions. In one tunnel, they saw themselves boarding the phantom train, their faces blank and lifeless. In another, they were surrounded by the passengers' ghosts, their hands reaching out in desperation. "These are illusions," Olivia said, forcing herself to look away. "It's trying to break us." Ethan nodded, though his hands trembled. "We can't let it. We have to keep moving." The pendant's light grew brighter as they approached a central chamber. The air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder and more urgent. The chamber was vast, its walls covered in intricate symbols that glowed faintly. At its center stood an ornate pedestal, and on it rested an object, a clock, its hands moving backward in slow, deliberate ticks. "That's it," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "That must be the tether holding the curse in place." As they approached the clock, the shadowy entity reappeared, its form towering over them. "You think destroying that will free them?" it hissed. "It will only doom them to eternal oblivion. Their souls are mine, and I will not let them go." Ethan stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You don't get to decide that. These people deserve peace." The entity roared, its shadowy tendrils lashing out. Olivia dodged, grabbing the clock and holding it up. The pendant around her neck glowed fiercely, and the clock began to crack. "No!" the entity screamed, its form destabilizing. "You don't understand. The train was a sanctuary, a place to escape the horrors of their lives." Ethan hesitated, the entity's words giving him pause. What if it's telling the truth? What if breaking this makes things worse? Olivia looked at him, her expression resolute. "We can't let fear stop us. Whatever this thing is, it's not salvation. It's control." With a final surge of strength, Olivia smashed the clock against the pedestal. The chamber erupted in light, and the entity let out a deafening scream as it dissolved into nothingness. The maze collapsed around them, and the whispers turned into cries of relief. One by one, the passengers' spirits appeared, their faces no longer twisted in pain. They smiled at Ethan and Olivia before fading into the light. Ethan and Olivia found themselves back at the train station, the sun rising over the horizon. The phantom train was gone, and the air felt lighter, freer. "We did it," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. Ethan nodded, a weary smile on his lips. "We broke the curse." As they walked away from the station, the pendant in Olivia's hand crumbled into dust. The nightmare was over, but the memory of their journey would stay with them forever. The morning sun painted the horizon in hues of gold and crimson, but for Ethan and Olivia, the warmth of its rays felt distant. The phantom train had vanished, and with it, the cursed echoes of those who had been trapped. Yet, the weight of what they had experienced lingered like a shadow over their hearts. They stood on the abandoned platform, now overgrown with vines and weeds, as though no train had ever stopped there. Olivia dusted her hands, watching the remnants of the pendant scatter into the wind. "It's over," she whispered. Ethan didn't reply immediately. His gaze was fixed on the faint outline of tracks disappearing into the distance. "Is it, though? What if there's more to this? What if there are other trains, other curses?" Life in Blackwater resumed its quiet normalcy, but for Ethan and Olivia, things were far from the same. News of the mysterious train's disappearance spread like wildfire. The locals had their own theories, ranging from divine intervention to an elaborate hoax, but no one truly understood the depth of what had transpired. Back at the bookstore, Ethan flipped through ancient tomes, desperately searching for any mention of similar phenomena. Meanwhile, Olivia combed through archives and records, piecing together fragments of forgotten lore. One evening, Olivia burst into the shop, her face pale but determined. "Ethan, I found something." He laid a faded map on the counter, its edges frayed and ink smudged with age. Several points were marked along a network of train tracks, each labeled with a single word: disappeared. Ethan's brow furrowed. They're other towns, aren't they? Other places where trains vanished. Olivia nodded. "I think the phantom train was just one manifestation of something much larger. Whatever it is, it's ancient and widespread." That night, as they pored over the map, the door to the bookstore creaked open. A man in a tattered coat stepped inside, his eyes weary but sharp. He carried an old, leather-bound journal and placed it on the counter without a word. "Can we help you?" Ethan asked cautiously. The man nodded. "You're the ones who stopped the train, aren't you?" Olivia exchanged a glance with Ethan. "How do you know about that?" The man tapped the journal. "Because I've been hunting these trains for years. You're not the first to encounter one, and you won't be the last." He opened the journal, revealing pages filled with sketches of trains, detailed accounts of disappearances, and cryptic symbols similar to those Ethan and Olivia had seen in the void. "These trains are part of a network," the man continued, "a web of cursed tracks that span across dimensions. Each train feeds on despair, luring passengers who have nowhere else to turn." The man's revelation sent a chill down their spines. Olivia clenched her fists. "If what you're saying is true, then we need to stop them." The man shook his head. "It's not that simple. Destroying one train weakens the network, but it doesn't end it. The source of this curse lies at the heart of the web, the central station." Ethan leaned forward. "And where is that?" The man hesitated before pointing to a faint mark on Olivia's map. "Here, but reaching it is nearly impossible. The station exists outside of time and space. The only way to find it is to follow the tracks and survive." As dawn broke over Blackwater, Ethan and Olivia packed their belongings, readying themselves for a journey they couldn't fully comprehend. The stranger, who introduced himself as Marcus, handed them the journal. "You'll need this," he said. "And one more thing." From his pocket, he produced a small, intricate compass. Unlike ordinary compasses, its needle spun erratically, glowing faintly in the dark. "This will guide you, but only if you let it," Marcus explained. "It doesn't point north. It points to the truth." Ethan and Olivia stared at the compass, the weight of its significance pressing down on them. As they stepped onto the first set of forgotten tracks, the compass's needle began to spin faster. The air grew colder, and the faint sound of a train whistle echoed in the distance. Olivia turned to Ethan. "Are you ready for this?" He took a deep breath, gripping her hand tightly. "No, but we don't have a choice." The tracks shimmered beneath their feet, and the world around them began to dissolve into shadow and light. In the distance, a train materialized, its silhouette both haunting and familiar. As the whistle grew louder, the ground trembled beneath them. The train approached, its windows glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. "Welcome aboard," a disembodied voice said, sending shivers down their spines. The story ends with the train doors sliding open, inviting them to step into the unknown once more. As the midnight hour approached, the wind howled through the trees, and the moon cast long, eerie shadows over the forgotten track. Ethan and Olivia stood at the edge of the railway platform, the rusted old sign swaying in the breeze, its letters barely visible in the dim light. The train had come, and now they knew they had no choice but to face the unimaginable. The last few weeks had been a blur of strange occurrences, of whispers and shadows, of dreams that bled into reality. The phantom train had drawn them into its web, but now they were determined to unravel the truth. They had come too far to turn back. "I don't think we're going to like what we find," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling as she gripped Ethan's hand tightly. Ethan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. They had already seen the horrors this train had left in its wake. The missing passengers, the disembodied voices, and the chilling presence that seemed to haunt every inch of the track. But now they were about to board it themselves. The train appeared out of the mist, a ghostly figure emerging from the darkness like a living nightmare. It was just as they had seen it before, but this time it was real, tangible, terrifyingly real. Its rusted exterior gleamed under the moonlight, the wheels screeching as it came to a halt in front of them. Ethan and Olivia exchanged a nervous glance before stepping onto the train. The doors creaked open, as if inviting them into the abyss. Inside, the train was eerily silent, its carriages empty and dimly lit by flickering lights. It was as if the train had been frozen in time, its passengers long gone. The air was thick with an oppressive sense of dread, and every step they took seemed to echo through the empty carriages. As they moved further into the train, they felt a presence, something watching them from the shadows. They weren't alone. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the train, soft and cold like a whisper from the past. "Welcome aboard." The voice sent chills down their spines. It was the same voice they had heard over the radio all those weeks ago, the one that had known their darkest secrets. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. "What do you want from us?" The voice laughed, a low, hollow sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You've already given me what I wanted," it said. "But now it's time for you to give me everything." A shadow moved across the wall of the train, and then, out of the darkness, figures began to emerge. The lost souls, the passengers who had boarded this train long ago, their faces twisted in expressions of torment. They were reaching out toward Ethan and Olivia, their hollow eyes filled with sorrow and rage. Ethan felt a cold hand brush against his arm. He turned to see one of the figures standing next to him, its face a grotesque mask of decay and pain. The figure reached out, its fingers cold as ice, and whispered in his ear, "Join us forever." Olivia screamed as another figure lunged toward her, its hands like claws, its mouth opening to reveal jagged, rotting teeth. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her away just as the figure swiped at them. The train lurched forward, and they were thrown to the ground. "Get up!" Ethan shouted, dragging Olivia to her feet. They had to get off the train, but the doors had slammed shut, trapping them inside. The voice echoed again, louder this time, more insistent. "You can't escape. You never could." Ethan and Olivia scrambled through the train, desperate to find a way out. But everywhere they turned, more figures appeared, ghostly remnants of the past, their twisted faces contorted in agony. As they reached the back of the train, they saw something that made their blood run cold. The conductor, the same man who had greeted them when they first boarded, was standing at the end of the carriage, his eyes hollow, his face a mask of death. "You've reached your destination," he said, his voice a low, guttural whisper. Ethan felt a chill in his bones. This was it. There was no way out. The train lurched again, the sound of the wheels scraping against the track growing louder. The world outside was a blur of shadows, but the figures inside the train were closing in, their hands reaching for them, pulling them closer to the darkness. Then, everything went black. Ethan woke up with a start, gasping for air. His hands were shaking, and his heart was racing. He was lying on the cold ground, surrounded by an empty forest. The sound of the train was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of the night. "Olivia!" he shouted, looking around desperately. "Olivia, where are you?" There was no answer. Panic surged through him as he scrambled to his feet, scanning the area for any sign of her. But the forest was empty. The train was gone. The ghostly figures, the voices, everything vanished. He was alone. As he staggered forward, his mind still reeling from the nightmare, he noticed something on the ground. A small, silver key. He bent down to pick it up, his fingers trembling as he turned it over in his hand. A voice, faint but familiar, whispered in his ear, "You're not free. None of us are." The key was cold in his hand, its surface smooth and unforgiving. And then, in the distance, he heard the faint sound of a train whistle.